Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dehls. This is episode 19 of the Fantasy Reaction Show. We are here after Sunday night football, not Monday night football, Sunday night football, where we just watched a good matchup in the Bengals and the Bills. Thought it'd be a little bit better than what the result ended up being. Before we get into any football-related activities, Mr. Dehls, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing good, man. At least my Celtics are 5-0 because right now fantasy I've 3 L's in a row. Me and Drew are going on opposite paths. To start off the year, I was hot, Drew was cold. These last 4 weeks, tides turn. Drew's won. Was this 4 in a row now, right?
Six in a row.
Apologies. You were 0-3. I'm wrong. He was 0-3, 6-3. I started off 4-2. I'm now 4-5. I've lost 3 in a row. That's what I've been thinking about. This is probably the first week where my start sits really might cost me an L. The biggest one was Kincaid and Zay Flowers. I was telling you before, right before 1 o'clock, or last night, I told myself, tomorrow morning, you've got to really sit down and think Zay Flowers or Dalton Kincaid. One thing leads to another. I'm watching the Dolphins-Chiefs game. It's like 12:30. My girl comes back. We start making breakfast. 1 o'clock's off. And I'm like, whatever. I probably would have started Zay regardless. And he was pretty terrible. Kincaid had himself a nice game. But regardless, we move on. How are you doing tonight?
I'll tell you what, Mr. Dehls, I'm doing pretty damn good. It is always great when you trust the lineup. You know, I really haven't made any trades this season. I've trusted the draft. I trusted my waiver wire additions. And here we are on a 6-game heater. Life's good. Life's good. I mean, I get to watch one of the best quarterbacks in the game in Jalen Hurts. And it just so happens that Dak Prescott's getting hot at the right time. And my start of the week, who has been my start of the week these last couple of games that he's been on the field, he would have been quarterback one if it wasn't for the quarterback that is based off this title of this show. But those two guys, man, they make watching football pretty damn fun. And yeah, I can't complain too much. But as we talk about our ups and our downs of fantasy football, let's go ahead and talk about this Sunday night football matchup between the Bengals and the Buffalo Bills. Let me get your takeaways. What really excited you most about this game? I know that we're going to be talking a lot primarily about Joe Burrow. I'm assuming for the idea that early in the season, he struggled. And it was obvious that it was because of that calf injury. We hadn't seen Joe Burrow really get comfortable in that pocket, really escape, do what we know Joe Burrow can do, which is escape pressure, get outside the pocket, make big plays happen. We've seen that over these last couple of weeks, and I say that to you because I know you're a Joe Burrow guy. You're one of those that decided Joe Burrow would be your fantasy quarterback, and he had been biting you. That decision been biting you in the ass early on, but as the season progresses, that's starting to look smarter and smarter, Mr. Dehls.
Yeah, it's funny because those first 4 or 5 weeks, Joe Burrow was terrible. My team was figuring out ways to win. Now, these last 2-3 weeks where Burrow has been on top of the world, my team starts
Fantasy's
to lose.
crazy. It's cool.
Yeah, this game kind of went how I was expecting, though, just in a football aspect. Like, I was expecting the Bengals to win this game. Buffalo in these big moments just always feel to come up a little bit short. Offensively, I mean, Josh Allen led the way again, rushing with 44 yards. James Cook had 6 carries. Latavius Murray had 2 carries. The mindset really on both teams, even though Cincinnati did rush it a bit more with Mixon getting 14 carries, was we're just going to pass. I don't think either of these defenses are able to stop these offenses since he was just able to make some more timely stops. But really the biggest takeaway is Dalton Kincaid, 11 targets. This is 3 weeks in a row now where he's going to be I don't know where he's going to finish because this was a great tight end week, oddly enough, like a phenomenal tight end week where the guys who were in the top 10, it wasn't just like, oh, we lucked into a touchdown. Like they actually had good games. But 3 weeks in a row where you have to be just, over the moon over Kincaid's production. This is 3 weeks of 60-plus yards, 10 receptions tonight, 11 targets, led the team. Stephon Diggs continued doing his thing. And Khalil Shakir, back-to-back weeks of being fantasy relevant, being just NFL relevant, because it's a guy that was drafted in the 5th round a couple of seasons ago, and he was more or less left for dead. Like he was just someone who had no productivity, someone who didn't even really see the field enough. They had Cole Beasley there. He just wasn't seeing the field. And now he's getting involved. You could kind of see the twitchiness. He's a smaller receiver, but he's able to beat man coverage. And then from Cincinnati's point of view, T. Higgins, he's arrived. He's finally here, right? He had the rib injury. Of course, you had Joe Burrow playing poorly to start off the season, but he had the best game easily of his season, going for over 100 yards, 8 receptions. He was the number one option. Jamar Chase, 4 for 41. Did he get a bit banged up on a deep shot where he kind of landed awkwardly on his back? But yeah, if you have T. Higgins, this was really the game you've been waiting for, right? Like you drafted him in those middle rounds, knowing that when he's 100% and Joe Burrow's 100%, this is the type of game T. Higgins can give you. Just took a while to get there. So overall, not surprised Cincinnati won, but I think the biggest positive or biggest takeaway I have is Dalton Kincaid rest of the season might be a league winner at the tight end position.
And Kincaid, if he didn't have that fumble, that honestly kind of ruined the Buffalo Bills' chances of really coming away with this W or giving them a true shot of winning this game. If he didn't have that fumble, he would have finished as tight end 7 on the week. Did finish with a tight end 8 finish. He was phenomenal with the amount of targets that he's getting. You can't help but feel nothing but optimistic that this guy is if you have Kincaid, he is your locked in tight end rest of the season, of course, excluding buys. But he has been these last few weeks a reliable option for Josh Allen. And really that had always been the question. Who's going to be that guy on a consistent basis that Josh Allen can rely on outside of Stephon Diggs? And Stephon Diggs was still able to get his normal 6 for 87, gets a touchdown. That's the Stephon Diggs that we know that we're going to see every single week. But when you have someone opposite of Diggs, someone that's reliable, especially in this pass offense, it really excites you. There was the rumblings of it being potentially a Gabe Davis. You mentioned Khalil Shakir. He had himself a solid ball game. Gabe Davis dropped you a goose today. It really is starting to seem as if Kincaid is the number 2 true option for Josh Allen. I really do like what's going on there with their pass offense. It's just they came out a little bit flat. Lou Anarumo, he drew up a great scheme he drew up a great defensive scheme in that first half. I'll say the Bengals offense in the first half looked a lot better than it did in the second, but that really kind of changed the script. You mentioned James Cook only having 6 carries. I think it's them going down early, and they felt as if they had to rely on Josh Allen a little bit more than probably what they should have. Josh Allen had himself a solid fantasy production and finishes with almost 25 fantasy points. Josh Allen's going to be Josh Allen. He's a top 2 fantasy quarterback for a reason. But if this offense wants to continue to progress, it needs to continue to trust that the running game is going to be there for them. James Cook has been efficient in his I should say, limited amount of touches this season. But really, when we've seen this offense click is when they're relying on the run game and not giving up on it. We saw with Miami in the 9:30 game versus Kansas City, where you figure, hey, it's about time. Unleash Tyreek, Waddle. But no, they stuck to the run game and ended up getting them in a situation where they had a strong chance to win the game at the end of a strong chance to win at the very end of the game. With Buffalo, I feel similar. Trust James Cook. I think that he's a good enough back that they don't give him enough credit for. And I know Josh Allen's amazing. It's going to be in the fantasy numbers every single week. But Cook should be seeing more than 6 carries. He should be seeing more than 10 looks a game. I know he doesn't have that same build. I know I'm a James Cook guy, but he's shown me some great things in this season. I just think Buffalo needs to unleash him.
Absolutely. He's still averaging nearly 5 yards a carry. He's about 4.7 entering the game. And we saw it really only one time earlier this season against Jacksonville, where he had 5 carries for -4 yards. They really weren't able to do anything offensively, at least running the ball, that is. But 3 for 25 through the air. So it wasn't a good game by any means, but at least involved in the passing game. And you mentioned it that, James Cook isn't this prototypical workhorse build, but you have to give him more than 6 attempts, right? Like at some point, you just become so predictable as an offense that it's going to alter your passing game too. If the defense knows that you're not going to run the ball, barring it could be a Josh Allen run, design run, or him just scrambling. But when James Cook is only getting 6 carries, regardless of score, because it was 14-7 at the end of the first quarter, going into halftime, they were down 21-7. But halftime down 2 scores, I don't know if that's just we abandoned the run game, right? Especially because James Cook has showed you all season long that he could take on 12, 15, 17 carries a game and still give you 4 to 5 yards per carry. It's not so much that you have to run the ball, right? Because of course, when you're coming down, passing the ball is just going to be more efficient. You're going to be able to pick up more chunk plays. But it's just having that balance and not having to rely so much on Josh Allen to do everything, especially because at the end of the game, your defense couldn't get a stop. I know this game ended up being a 6-point game, but it felt like the whole time the Bengals were in control. It felt like they were always the ones that were kind of like a half step ahead of the Bills. And it's kind of been the DNA almost of Buffalo in a negative sense that when they have these big games, Cincinnati, the Kansas City Chiefs, whoever it might be, it just always feels like the other team has a little bit more going for them. They always feel like they're just a little bit ahead of the Buffalo Bills. I'm not attributing that just to abandoning the run game by any means. It's more of just like a franchise philosophy kind of thing where they just can't seem to get over that small hump where like we know the team's talented enough. We know Josh Allen's talented enough. It's just in these big situations, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the playoffs again because first of all, the rest of their schedule is brutal, right? They got like the Cowboys on there. They still got the Jets. They have Miami one more time. The rest of their schedule is very brutal. But
Play us next week.
I have a hard time. Miami, that is, or Denver. Denver,
Come
of
on,
course.
bro. Serious?
It's hard to get over this feeling, shake this feeling of Buffalo that somehow they're closer to a championship now than they've been in the past, right? It feels like a couple seasons ago when they go up against Kansas City in that playoff game that felt like their best chance. But now they feel just a little bit lost offensively, that they can't consistently get the ball to their guys, that really being James Cook. Gabe Davis, we know, has this ability to disappear and have these big games and have these goose eggs. But like you mentioned, I do think having Dalton Kincaid as that number 2 option should help this offense.
You mentioned Buffalo's schedule. They have Denver, the Jets, Philadelphia before heading into that bye week 13. Coming off the bye, Kansas City, Dallas, the Chargers, finishes the season with New England, who they've had a pretty, they did lose to them this most recent time, but Josh has feasted. And then Miami, week 18 in Miami. So this schedule by no means is easy. We're going to have a conversation about fantasy football, you feel confident in Josh. You feel confident in Stephon. I'm feeling very confident in Dalton, given what he's shown us over these last 3 weeks. I can't feel confident in Gabe. Shakir, if I'm desperate at a flex, I could live with that, I guess, but I don't feel good. If I don't feel good in Gabe, who's shown me a little bit more, then I can't feel great about Shakir. I don't feel good about James Cook, who I know people have to rely on as probably a RB2. I'm praying that that's the case. If he's your RB1, say goodnight. That's really it. The top heavy guys are going to be great on a consistent basis. We know that with the Buffalo Bills, but it really comes down to those secondary pieces. It's the James Cook, it's the Gabe Davis, the Shakir as of recent. So I think the Bills, the top guys will be okay given the schedule, but for those guys that are on this prolific offense that are not the upper echelon, I do worry. Now let's talk about the winners of tonight's game. Let's talk about the Bengals for a quick second. Joe Burrow, 348 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looks the most comfortable these last few weeks as he's ever been in the pocket. He's trusting T. Higgins. We've seen T. Higgins now get involved for the first time in some time. You mentioned Jamar Chase really landing harshly on his back there. Chris Collinsworth would not shut up about it, that he's going to wake up tomorrow. He's going to be feeling it. Don't call him. Don't text him. He's going to be in some pain. Joe Mixon, another game, another solid performance. 14 carries, 37 yards, gets into the end zone where he gets a lot of his work. 5 catches, 6 targets for 31 yards. This Bengals offense, slowly but surely, is getting back to exactly what we all thought that it would be. When Joe Burrow is healthy, this is one of the most prolific passing offenses in the game. And when that's the case, you see the field kind of open up for Joe Mixon, who in the first early going weeks had to be relied on a little bit more than what we were anticipating. But now that we see this pass game start to be more vertical and start pushing the ball downfield, now we're seeing a little bit more easier plays for Joe Mixon, who can take the screen pass, can take the dump offs and get a little extra yardage. But T. Higgins, this really, like you already alluded to, this is the hugest. When I think of the Cincinnati Bengals offense, right, obviously Joe Burrow's at the forefront, but in terms of guys that benefit from Joe Burrow being healthy, it's T. Higgins, because when he's extending plays, T. Higgins is able to get open. He's not one of those guys that you can allow for a play to develop and you still can clamp him. He's simply too big. He's too physical. He's going to get his end of the day. And Jamar Chase is the exact same way, but he is 7-11, as he alludes to himself, although did have a drop touchdown, which was unacceptable. Got to be honest there. Got to be honest there. But he, of all people, gets a pass. He's been pretty phenomenal all season long. Unlike T. Higgins, who we've kind of been waiting for this moment outside of the Ravens game, it was great to see him back into the dominant column.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a ton of like huge takeaways from the Bengals side of things. It was kind of just looked like the Cincinnati Bengals we know, right? I feel like on Buffalo's side, a lot of their offense kind of felt difficult at times. Then you had, half of your points damn near at the, the last 2 minutes of the game. But for the Bengals, it felt very Cincinnati Bengals. Things felt a bit easier, a bit more, with some fluidity to them, kind of in structure more so where Josh Allen's kind of making plays happen either with his legs or outside the pocket. Burr just looked very comfortable in the pocket. Looked like he was just commanding the offense like he always does. 350 yards and 2 touchdowns. This is why you drafted Joe Burrow in the first round of Superflex leagues. This is why, he's been a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Not really worried about Jamar Chase, as long as he's healthy going forward. We know how great Jamar Chase is. T. Higgins, this is I don't want to just forget that T. Higgins last year was pretty inconsistent, right? So you see this 8 for 110, you might be like, damn, T. Higgins is back. But if you go back and look at last season, T. Higgins definitely had some ups and downs throughout the season. Not saying you should move off T. Higgins by any means, but just know that with some highs with T. Higgins does some come lows. And this season more so due to injury more than just productivity on the field. But overall, you got to feel good about the Bengals going forward.
The good thing about Bengals players and fantasy footballs is they have already had their buy-in. That's been one of the pros for this Bengals team because now it's allowed them to get a little bit healthy. Now we look at this remaining schedule down the stretch where these next couple of games, they do have a Houston and a Baltimore, who of course have been solid defenses in terms of pass defense, but Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Minnesota, Pittsburgh again. They close off with Kansas City, who have been one of the better under the radar defenses when we talk about the grand scheme of the NFL. But I say that with the idea of let's list some wide receivers. Would you rather them rest the season, fantasy football, over a T. Higgins?
Okay.
T. Higgins or Amari Cooper?
Amari looked really good today.
He did.
It's so hard to trust Deshaun Watson because he had a good game, but it's Arizona. And his other good game was against Tennessee, whose defense was, secondary is not good. I think I would still have T. Higgins.
Okay. T. Higgins or Deontay Johnson?
Your guy, Deontay Johnson.
Yo, he's a problem. He is a problem. Fantasy football. Again, this is different from the real life. Listen, we if you feel like you may lean T. Higgins over Deontay Johnson, that's not a hot take. It's not. But in fantasy football, Deontay Johnson gets peppered with targets.
Does. That's why I think I lean Deontay. I feel like he's going to be more consistent on a week-to-week basis.
Michael Pittman.
Pittman's been a dog. He had another solid game today.
He's been unbelievably good.
Yeah. I'm still trusting Cincinnati's offense here. Gardner Minshew, like for fantasy, sometimes he's decent, right? Because he'll have whether it's garbage time or kind of F it, I'll just throw it up to Michael Pittman type attitude. But I'm going to trust T. Higgins in this Bengals passing offense.
T. Higgins or Smitty?
Ooh, Smitty's kind of come to life these last couple of weeks too. That's tough. It's like we're, full circle moment back to T. Higgins or Smitty. It's like it's every debate. That's tough. Where would you lean? I don't have a clear answer with that one.
With the way that Philadelphia has been passing the football, and I say this with the idea that Jalen's been dropping back as much as the top guys in the league, and that was kind of a knock on him last year. But this year, they really leaned into Jalen Hurts and asked him to be the offense in terms of moving the ball vertically down the field. We've seen Smitty kind of struggle, but given the fact that they're really leaning on the pass offense, part of me feels like I got to lean Smitty.
I'm okay with that.
All right, we'll do 2 more names. Jacoby Myers.
Jacoby's been a dog. I'll go with T. Higgins there, though, as well. The Raiders play with some fight today. We're going to talk about them tomorrow.
They did.
They play with some fight.
Last name, Mike Evans.
He got banged up. I don't know if
Mhm.
he ended up coming back into the game. I saw him on the sideline nursing something. If he's healthy, though, I think I would still trust Mike.
Okay. All right. I'm cool with that. I'm
Yeah.
cool with that. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. I didn't answer any of these, so I'll be fair here. I'll go T. Higgins over Amari Cooper. I feel like Amari Cooper, where he does have his great games, T. Higgins should be a little bit more consistent than what Cooper is. He has the more consistent quarterback in a Joe Burrow. With Deontay Johnson and T. Higgins, I lean Deontay. I just think he gets too much love. So much so that George Pickens is having a fit on Instagram saying how he's done. Free
Free
him.
me.
He needs the ball more.
He's funny.
That's where you kind of lose me. Mike Evans or T, I lean T. Mike Evans or
Okay.
excuse me, T Higgins or Pittman. That one's also close. I feel like I gotta go opportunity. I think I'm leaning Pittman here. He just gets peppered with a ton of targets. We haven't seen him have under double-digit fantasy points. I don't think once this season. He's one of those that we're going to talk about in the wide receiver studs, where he finished as wide receiver 11 this season. And I feel like we need to talk about Michael Pittman and what he's been doing, at least in fantasy football. And what was the other name that I mentioned to you? I think that was
Said
it.
Amari,
Oh,
Deontay,
yeah, and
Smitty.
Smitty, I answered. That's fine.
Yes, facts.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's not an easy conversation when it comes to T, because the talent is obviously not been on full display this season, but the last couple of weeks we're starting to see this Bengals offense coming to fruition, and T Higgins obviously is a strong piece of that. Now, let's move on to our quarterback studs of the week. You see the title. It's over. The Rookie of the Year race was won today by CJ Stroud, setting the record for most yards in a game by a rookie quarterback. Mr. CJ Stroud goes for 470 yards, finishes the game with 5 touchdowns, finishes the game with 41.8 fantasy points. More importantly, he put on one of the best performances of the season, and he's doing this as a rookie. Now, last week it was a different story. And the last couple of weeks, it's been a different story where he hasn't been that same guy that we saw early on in the season, but a Bucs defense who's been respectable. They really have been a respectable bunch. For him to do this and have the performance that he had today with a game-winning drive with 6 seconds left, scoring
Insane.
that touchdown, it truly was one of the best performances I've seen. And honestly, I guess it has to be the best rookie performance I've ever seen. The one that comes close to me is Cam Newton's debut when he lit it up for 4 touchdowns in his debut. I think it was 2 passing, 2 rushing. It was something special. Of course, doing that in your first game, that's amazing. But nevertheless, to do this after having a game where the conversations kind of flipped, Bryce Young outperformed you. I was one of those guys who was adamant Bryce Young played better than a CJ Stroud. And now this week, where football's so week to week, you have Bryce Young who goes and throws 3 INTs. They're talking about potentially benching him, but they stuck with those guys. Those guys handled that very well in the presser. And then you have CJ Stroud go ahead and finish as quarterback 1 on the week. I do believe this race was won today. CJ Stroud solidified himself as the offensive rookie of the year.
Yeah, so his odds has moved to minus 500 to win the award. So barring something
Deserved.
dramatic, he was amazing, man. And you look at the top performers, it's Noah Brown and Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz, and you're just thinking like, damn, there's gonna be a day he has legitimate like wide receiver 1. Nico Collins had a touchdown too, solid game, but these guys are good players. But CJ Stroud is elevating this whole offense. And when we did the Patreon show, go subscribe to the Patreon, by the way, if you want an extra episode a week. I mentioned how defenses have been taking away the middle of the field for Houston. How is Bobby Slowick and this passing offense and CJ Stroud going to answer? And they answered with resounding answers today. I mean, over 400 yards. He got the ball back with 40-something seconds left. That final possession, I'm like, oh, this game's probably over. You know, Stroud is doing great. He just marches down the field. Big play after big play after big play. Had some of the prettiest throws. That throw to Tank Dell on the right side of the field. I mean, there's some of the throws out there that you're like, this is a rookie doing this. Like, this is someone, if they were in year 3, 4, 5, I'd be mesmerized. These are like Joe Burrow level throws with pinpoint accuracy and precision. So CJ Stroud is that dude. He had a bit of a, I don't even want to say slump, more so a fantasy slump than real life slump, where
Definitely.
he didn't look as insane as he did those first couple of weeks, but he reminded us today.
So it's funny because the conversations have been kind of scattered where you've seen Puka Nacua kind of have himself a great rookie campaign. Of course, Bryce Young, where he hasn't solidified himself to be in this conversation, did have himself a great ball game and has been playing some better football as of late. This game versus the Colts was definitely a hiccup, but the conversation's done. It's over. CJ Stroud, 475 touchdowns. He could play as mediocre as he wants rest of the season. The comments really kill me. He could play as mediocre as he wants the rest of the season. With this performance alone, he solidified himself as the winner. The next that I want to mention, Josh Dobbs, coming in without even taking a snap of practice. He comes in and finishes as your quarterback 5 on the week, goes for 20 completions, 30 attempts, 158 yards, 2 touchdowns. But on the ground, this is where he did a lot of his work. 7 carries, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Has a game-winning drive as well. It really is crazy to me that he could go and have this type of performance. And I really quickly want to highlight how much I hate the Atlanta Falcons. I hate the Atlanta Falcons because when I pick them, they lose. When I don't, they win. I pick them this week going up against backup quarterback. And then on top of it, they go to the backup of the backup. And Josh Dobbs is able to do a job. Now, I just wanted to highlight him because I think he deserves endless respect for this. To do this on such late notice, coming in, to probably not even know the names of all the guys in the huddle and still be as dominant as he was. Dominant fantasy football-wise, of course.
There's
25.
Sorry, what were you saying? There's a
25
report out
fantasy
there.
points.
He was insane. So of course, like he got traded on Wednesday, so doesn't really know the playbook. This is from Alec Lewis, who's a Minnesota Vikings beat reporter. I guess after the game, they were just asking Kevin O'Connell about like his thoughts on him or whatever. Or excuse me, they were asking Josh Dobbs about the game, and Josh Dobbs said that Kevin O'Connell was essentially translating calls and mapping out plays mid huddle as the play clock was ticking down. So as you know, like when you have like the headset in your helmet, you have till I think 15 seconds on the game clock, or the play clock, whatever, until it goes out, right? And then you can't hear your coach. So Kevin O'Connell, he was basically go up to the line, and Kevin O'Connell, I'm assuming he's saying like, all right, the X receiver, he's running to go, tight ends running in route. Like he's basically mapping out the plays. And Josh Dobbs went out there, executed, and won an NFL football game after being on the roster for like 3 or 4 days. The Cardinals kind of gave him up for nothing, just saying like Kyler Murray's going to be back. We'll just play tune for 1 week. But Josh Dobbs is showing that he could be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league.
And he's had multiple top 10 finishes in fantasy football this season. I feel like that's why I wanted to hide him. Last week against Baltimore, he puts up a top 10 finish, goes to a new team. I believe he's been on 5 teams since the end of last season. And to be on a new team, like you just mentioned, his coach is drawing up the plays for him in real time. And to go and give you another top 10 finish, just one-upped himself. He goes and puts himself into the top 5. Endless respect to Josh Dobbs. And the last guy I want to mention, it has to be Mr. Dak Prescott. And I say that with the idea of he came into the season and he was mediocre as hell. Quarterback 29, quarterback 17, 18, 19, 25. The last 3 weeks that he has played football, quarterback 1, quarterback 3, and depending on how Monday night goes, quarterback 2. CJ Stroud had to go and put up a historic performance to keep him away from this top spot. I said it on the last show that we had. Dak Prescott is primed for a top 7 finish with his rest of season schedule. Goes up against the Giants, goes up against Carolina. I think Carolina is probably the better pass defense that he's going to face. Washington, Seattle, Philadelphia again, a banged up Buffalo, Miami, and Detroit to end the season for fantasy football, of course, because week 18, you should not be playing in them, although you probably wish he was because they're playing Washington. He is going to feast nonstop, and he has been on a tear. He had a chance to win this game, gave CeeDee Lamb an opportunity. I think CeeDee Lamb kind of just cut a little bit too in on his route. Should have cut in on the end zone to give himself a chance. But nevertheless, Dak Prescott, he has to be spoken about because of how poorly he started and how great he's been these last 3 weeks.
Absolutely. You've been on this for weeks. I don't think it was last show. You've been talking about this for weeks, that saying that the schedule upcoming is nice and he's executing. Him and CD have been basically the low key Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown these last couple of weeks. That's how great CD Lamb has
Love,
been.
love those
Moving on,
guys.
moving on to the duds. Only have a handful here, so just a little spoiler. There is like a ton of wide receiver duds that we have to get through, but quarterbacks and running backs this week wasn't too terrible. Lamar and Tua were probably the biggest disappointings, both finishing out of the top 15. Lamar was more so game script. They won 37-3. And
Yep.
Lamar's had a couple of these where they just went big and he doesn't have great fantasy finishes. But we know Lamar, we know the upside there. You're still going to play him, of course. To a different circumstance where the Chiefs just played great defense. You know, that Dolphins had to come back in that second half. They had some opportunities, but fell up short. The other duds, one being Will Levis on Thursday Night Football, which we did talk about last week. Didn't have any touchdowns, one interception, 260 total yards. So he had that 4 touchdown performance, his first game ever starting, has come back down to earth since then. Geno Smith, who was your sit of the week, ugly game, ugly matchup, 150 yards and interception. The Seahawks never had a chance in this game. This game was basically over by the end of the first, halfway through the second quarter. And then Bryce Young, who I thought was going to have a great game. He was my kind of QB2-ish start of the week, 173 yards and 3 interceptions. He had a couple of weeks there, right? You mentioned that CJ Stroud matchup where he outperformed CJ Stroud. We're like, okay, this is the Bryce Young we've been waiting on. This is the Bryce Young that went number 1 overall. And this game, just a major, major regression against one of the worst defenses, the worst scoring defense in the NFL. Coming into this week, the Colts allowed the most points per game, I think like 28, 29 points. And the Panthers couldn't do anything offensively. We're talking about Adam Thielen a little bit later. Nothing they were able to do offensively. But those are really the only duds for this week.
Yeah, Bryce really surprised me. I had a league where I was desperate. I felt I could start a Bryce Young, especially going up against Indianapolis, who you mentioned have been very generous to giving up points. For him to put up the dud that he did, it's growing pains. It's what you can expect with a rookie at times, but you got to be better than that, especially as the number 1 overall pick. And with how well you've been playing recently, for this to be the case, kind of feels like a little bit of regression.
Yeah,
now, moving on to our running back studs. The running back 1 of the week, my start of the week, Mr. Rachaad White. And I say that very, very excitingly, but not so, because my brother Joel Dehls unfortunately had to face the repercussions of going against Rachaad White. He goes up and drops 28 fantasy points, 20 carries, an insane workload, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 catches, 4 receptions for 46 yards. Now, I know the carries are going to intrigue a lot of people, but really where I get excited is the 4 catches for 4 targets. He's going to consistently get peppered with those targets, and it's been great to see, because I feel like Baker has kind of struggled with that throughout his career. It's been great to see now in Tampa Bay. He knows he has a great safety blanket in a Rachaad, and these last 3 weeks, we've seen Rachaad be extremely reliable in fantasy football. Rachaad White's one of the strongest RB2 plays going on for me. I love this matchup versus Houston. I was glad to see the result pop up.
He has no competition. That backfield, it's just him. There is nobody else back there. So continue playing Rachaad White.
Next name, Ramondre Stevenson. I feel like we keep going week to week where he's in our studs, he's in our duds, but then he can have games like these where 9 carries, 87 yards. I know a lot of that is due to that one big chunk play. Did have a touchdown, of course, 4 catches on 6 targets for 42 yards. Now, Ramondre is another tricky guy where you have no choice. If this is your RB2, you can feel good, maybe not as safe as you want to feel, but he can give you games like these where he gives you 23 fantasy points. He gives you a top 5 finish because of how talented he is. It's just understood that this Patriots offense simply lacks consistency.
Yeah, no, it's really ugly. And he had a 60-yard touchdown run, which was by far the longest run this season for him. I wonder where that stacks up amongst his career, because that's what we've been talking about these last few weeks was like, Ramondre doesn't have that explosive ability. And while, the 60-yard touchdown, of course, you eat your words a little bit, I still don't know if that's going to be a consistent thing, especially in this offense where there's not really a lot of explosive players around him. You really just want to see him get more work in the passing game. That's where he could find his consistently very Rachaad White-esque. Like if he's able to consistently get 4 or 5 targets, consistently get 30 to 40 receiving yards, that's kind of the Ramondre we saw more so last season's last couple of years where he's been really fantasy relevant. So really any of these running backs on poor offenses, you need the workload, you need to get the targets and the looks to be relevant. And of course, Ramondre got that today, plus the 60-yard touchdown.
Now, I'll mention two more guys. One being Mr. Josh Jacobs. Right now, he's been extremely dominant. And I say extremely dominant for the fact of didn't look so great starting on RB 30, 27, and 20. But since then, RB 5, RB 6, RB 10, and RB 2 as of right now, he has been, RB 3 as of right now. He has been a model of consistency these last few weeks. I look at Josh Jacobs, 26 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. You want to talk about someone who's not competing for opportunities. Of course, we know that's Josh Jacobs. But again, I wanted to mention his name for those that have him as your RB1. Understand that he's going to be all right. Josh Jacobs is going to be great. And the last name I want to mention is Keaton Mitchell for the Baltimore Ravens. Goes and finishes as your RB4. 9 carries for 138 yards, a touchdown. Did have one catch for on one target, but for -4. What really stands out, of course, is that 9 carries for 138. One was a giant touchdown as well. But for this output, and I understand game script was completely in Baltimore's favor, to have this type of finish, and with the way that Gus Edwards has been playing, I just can't help but feel like I have to address this, where Gus got into the end zone twice himself. Gus had himself a great fantasy ball game also. But with Keaton Mitchell getting to this statistical output, how do we feel about the Baltimore Ravens running back room?
He's one of their most explosive players. Today, he hit 21 miles per hour, which was the fastest by a ball carrier for the Ravens this season. I am curious because he did get that big touchdown basically in garbage time. So I am curious to see kind of where his carries were. Was it all in like the third and fourth quarter when they're up 3-4 scores? Because I remember I was watching the game and I had that like on a separate TV for the first half. And then it was a blowout. I turned it off. But it was still mostly Gus Edwards getting primarily all of the work in that first half. Then I saw Mitchell more in the second half. But this is a guy he's undrafted. He has explosiveness. He has shiftiness. And that's kind of what's lacking from this offense. And there's room for all of these running backs to succeed, right? There's room for
Definitely
Gus Edwards to continue to have touchdowns and kind of be the workhorse, and Keaton Mitchell to be more so of that change of pace running back. He's probably going to be the number one player on waiver wires this week. He probably should be. It is hard for me to say you should blow all of your remaining fab on him or go super aggressive just because we know Gus Edwards is the guy. We know Gus Edwards is the either 1 or 1A in this rushing attack, plus you have Lamar Jackson to deal with. But he's someone in a disgusting running back landscape right now that I want him on my team. I would love to roster him. And if he's my, like running back 4-ish on my team in an emergency situation, I have to play him, that would be great. There's a possibility he breaks out and kind of takes over this role, but I think they trust Gus Edwards too much for that to happen.
I'm with you.
Okay, so moving on to running back duds. Bijan Robinson, man. 11 carries, 51 yards, 4 targets, 2 receptions. I hate Arthur Smith. I am so happy the Falcons have lost these last 2 games. They lost to rookie Will Levis last week. And then they lost another game, which they should have won 100%. You lose. Jaron Hall is supposed to start. He gets knocked out. You have Josh Dobbs coming, who's been in the room for like fucking 20 minutes, and they lose this game. So on a positive note, Arthur Smith does not look good right now. He had one drive, end of the second quarter. They had the ball on the 6-yard line. I don't know if it's a turnover. Well, I think it was a turnover. 5-yard pass to Jonnu Smith. Tight end jet sweep to Jonnu Smith for 0 yards. Run to Tyler Algier for -4 yards. We serious? 8th overall pick. One of the best running back prospects we have ever seen, up there with Saquon Barkley. And this is the workload he gets. It's disgusting. It's ugly. People drafted Bijan Robinson first, second round, expecting like this is the, low-key, could be running back 1 on the season type of guy. He just doesn't get the work. And it's aggravating and it's stupid because he's so good at football. He's amazing at football. And I'm sitting here having to look at Arthur Smith go on these press conferences and just being like, oh, I know more than you guys. Like, it's okay for him to be like, I screwed up. Tyler Algier should not be getting all this work. He had 1 more carry than Bijan. Maybe I shouldn't do tight end jet sweeps to Jonnu Smith on the 1-yard line when I have one of the best running backs in football behind me. But, I guess I don't know anything. Arthur Smith knows all, right? I mean, so going forward, Bijan's still that guy. He's still top 10, right? But what are your thoughts?
I don't know if he's still top 10. These last few weeks, I haven't been feeling the most comfortable with Bijan. Him fumbling today also does suck. But then also pair it with Arthur Smith being a terrorist. I
He's
mean, it's
terrorist.
really it's not what you want. It's not what you want at all. Uh, I say this as someone who has Bijan in multiple leagues, and maybe I feel more emotional than I probably should. But again, I have to trust Bijan in multiple leagues. He is my RB1, like you just mentioned. So I trust that he's going to continue to get his workload. Heineke did kind of bring a little bit more juice to this offense. Them blowing this game was not on the offense by any means. The defense definitely sold the bag there. But at the end of the day, Bijan does have to be better.
Yeah, and shout out to our guy Jared Palladino in the comments. If you want to get happy, just look at my matchup and see how I screwed up this week. So having Stroud with 50 on your bench hurts, but it could be worse. Moving on to a couple of other duds. Kenneth Walker was back-to-back really bad weeks. 9 carries for 16 yards. Back-to-back weeks of under 10 carries. Back-to-back weeks of under 10 carries where he's in the offense, but he's not really in the offense. Before week 7, he had one game under 17 carries, and now he's back-to-back under 10 carries. Zach Charbonnet also did nothing in this game. Is this more so just bad game script? You're down 30. You can't run the ball. You can't do anything. Or do you have any worries about either Kenneth Walker's kind of role decreasing, Zach Charbonnet's increasing?
Zach Charbonnet's talented. That's the
Yeah.
one thing that's kind of undeniable. I look at Zach Charbonnet and I feel like I like what he has to offer. He's a little bit shifty. He's a strong dude. He provides versatility, and where Ken Walker is great in his own right. Let's not obviously ignore that, but Zach Charbonnet is good. I think that it's also more so the script of today's game. They got dominated on all fronts. The offense really couldn't get anything going. I think that really more so has to do with it. But when it comes to snap percentages, don't expect him to be at where he was earlier in the season. I think it's a little bit more realistic to see him kind of hover around that 65% because Zach Charbonnet deserves touches too.
Absolutely. So the last couple here, 2 of the guys I love this week, Zach Moss and Darrell Henderson, did nothing. Once Stafford got ruled out, you probably should have expected a bad offensive game from the Rams, but 10 carries for 10 yards was pretty terrible. We'll talk about some more Rams later. And Zach Moss came back down to earth, right? We were kind of waiting for Jonathan Taylor's here. Zach Moss is still involved. He's still involved. Like, all right, I guess this is the guy. And then this game, 7 carries for 26 yards. In a game they were leading basically the whole time. So it wasn't like this negative game script where they couldn't run the ball. They had opportunities to. It was a great matchup. Zach Moss, though, came up short. And the last name I want to mention here is Roschon Johnson, because we want him to take over as RB1 on this team. We wanted him to be the lead running back, had the concussion, missed a couple of weeks. He has 6 carries and then 2 carries. He's not the RB1. I don't know if he's going to be the RB1. Deontay Foreman is also a pretty solid running back too. So just someone that I wanted to bring up because he's probably on your bench or on somebody's bench. And if you're in a pinch, I don't think it's crazy to cut Roschon Johnson, especially because you have Khalil Herbert around the corner who's eligible to come off IR in a week or two.
To be honest, without Justin Fields, I don't know if I love anyone in this offense now. I know when we talk about tight ends, we're obviously going to have to talk about Cole Kmet. He had himself a great ball game, but we haven't seen DJ Moore be fantasy relevant since Justin Fields has been gone. We haven't seen these running backs be consistent. I know we've spoken about Deontay Foreman and how solid he's been fantasy-wise for sure, but the amount of inconsistencies that we see with this Bears offense without Justin Fields, I can't feel great about anyone moving forward, really. You have no choice. You have to put DJ Moore in your lineup. A Cole Kmet in tight end leagues, you have to put him in your lineup. But Badgett really is too sporadic for me at quarterback. Without Justin Fields, this offense really does lack that juice and that consistency that you want to see. But moving on to our fantasy wide receiver studs, I have to mention 3 of them who cracked the top 10 that all play for the same team. I'm talking about Tank Dell, I'm talking about Noah Brown, and I'm talking about Nico Collins. Tank Dell goes for 6 catches, 11 targets, 114, 2 touchdowns. This is your wide receiver 1 on the week. Noah Brown goes and finishes as your wide receiver 3 with 6 catches on 6 targets, 153 yards and a touchdown. And then wide receiver 10, like I mentioned, Nico Collins. He goes and has himself a ball game with 54 yards, a touchdown, goes and finishes with 15 fantasy points. Uh, it was crazy to me how this offense exploded in the manner that we did. We already spoke about the Texans offense, but it's still so insane to me that they had the ball game that they did. And for CJ to throw for that amount of yards and get these guys to be fantasy relevant, it really is a credit to how great he is as a ball player. But we can't undersell Tank Dell. I know that we've seen him kind of struggle over these last few weeks,
He's
but
getting banged up too.
that really does go hand in hand with it as well. But we've seen when he gets going and he's at his best, he can be one of the better fantasy plays that there are. Next name I want to mention has to be my guy Jahan Dotson, who back-to-back weeks
Here we
has
go.
been great for fantasy football. Last week, he goes and has 10 targets, brings in 8 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown. This week, 8 targets, 4 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Sam Howell finally realizing that Jahan Dotson is him. It's amazing. It gets me going. I'm excited. And these next couple of weeks, we have a Seattle, New York, Dallas, not the best of matchups. Miami does have his bye late into the season, week 14. The Rams, the Jets, San Fran. The San Fran game, don't look at it. Don't judge it based off the name. He can have himself a great game here. The only matchup that I don't love of all of these is the Jets game, because I respect DJ Reed and I respect the Sauce Gardner and I respect the scheme that Robert Saleh draws up regardless. But Jahan Dotson in back-to-back weeks, intriguing. Are you in?
I am, because the thing was when Jahan was terrible, when he was like these first like 4 or 5 weeks, when he was just unplayable, we said drop him. He was tied for the league. He was tied on the team for most targets. Like he was getting looks. He was involved in the offense. He was playing the snaps you want to. But the issue was he just wasn't producing. Part of that was Sam Howell kind of not being able to connect with him, a lot of off targets throws. But we saw Dotson last season. We saw he was a touchdown machine, a big play machine. And this year he was still getting the looks, but it was just kind of trusting the process over the results, saying, listen, and redraft when there's only 6 bench spots and you got buys and injuries and defenses, all this stuff to get through. It's like, all right, you might have to sack it up and cut Jahan Dotson. But right now, I mean, he's shown, we know he has the talent. Now he's producing. So I'm with you. I think Jahan Dotson is someone you could roster again.
So the last name I want to mention is going to be Michael Pittman. Now, I say with the idea of Michael Pittman in PPR leagues has been one of the best reliable options that there has been. And this week goes and finishes himself right outside the top 10 as the wide receiver 12. He goes and has 8 catches for 64 yards. Now, look just the amount of targets that he's seeing on a week-to-week basis: 11, 12, 11, 14, 13, 8. The lowest that he's seen is 5 targets. And that's in a game script where that team is just getting absolutely blown out. Now, to me, I just want to highlight Pittman because, again, I was one of those guys that wasn't fully embracing Michael Pittman, but I said that because of the rookie quarterback, the growing pains that we were expecting with an Anthony Richardson, but we saw that he had a great connection with AR early on, and with Gardner Minshew, it doesn't seem like things are slowing up. Right now, Michael Pittman is a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. Going forward, you have to hold him to the standard of a wide receiver 2 as his floor, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Moving on to wide receiver duds. So I mentioned we have a ton of him here. Jamar Chase highlights this 4 for 41. As we mentioned, got a little banged up in that second half, but even still in the first half, wasn't completely involved. Did have a drop touchdown, which he'll, catch 9 times out of 10. Pair of Rams teammates, Puka and Cooper Kupp, both struggled. It's Brett Ripien. What can you really do there? They have the bye next week. So not the best feeling, because over this last, at the end of next week, it's going to be a month. You're like, damn, I've gotten one good Puka game, right? And Cooper Kupp's kind of the same way, where he's not that, triple crown type Cooper Kupp guy. But we still think very highly of both of these guys. Devontae Adams now, it's a trend. It's not an outlier. It's a trend of Devontae Adams not putting up Devontae Adams numbers. 7 targets is still pretty solid, but 4 receptions for 34 yards. The Raiders were also up big, and Josh Jacobs was just gashing the Giants basically every time he got the ball. But this feels like this is going to be the first year where quarterback play is just going to hold back Devontae Adams. It feels like this is the first year where Devontae Adams is not going to be able to just say, doesn't matter if it's Derek Carr, Rodgers, I'm going to be a top 5 guy. Right now, with just the more so the philosophy of the offense, with the rookie quarterback in there now, you have Antonio Pierce, who feels more like hard-nosed football than kind of finesse pass game with a rookie quarterback, especially like I just said. I don't feel great. Like Tay is still that guy, still top 15 for fantasy for sure, but it does feel like that top 5 finish that you drafted him thinking you could get is probably over.
To be honest with you, Joel, this top 12, well, right now he's sitting as wide receiver 13, but a
Before
lot
this
of
start,
that's
yeah.
being carried off of week 3 versus Pittsburgh, where he went
Yep.
for 20 targets, over 170 yards, and multiple touchdowns. A lot of that's being carried by that 1 week. Over these last
That's
couple of
been
weeks, you mentioned it, 7.4, 2.1, had a solid game against Chicago for what he's been putting forward with 12.7. You expect way better from Devontae, 4.9, 8.5. Last great week that we got from him was against the Chargers, which was 16 fantasy points, which we know he can do so much better than that. So for me, it's hard to say it's locked and loaded top 15 just because of the numbers being so heavily weighted off that week 3 performance. But again, you have no choice. It's a Devontae Adams. You drafted him way too high. You have to put him in your lineup.
Yeah, I still think today's game script is going to be an outlier. Like, I still think the Raiders are going to be losing a lot of games, which is why I think that Tay should still be okay. He should still be someone that, is in your fantasy lineup, of course, because the Giants are just terrible. But anyhow, moving on. Adam Thielen, 5 catches for 29 yards. Last week, he was solid, right? 8 for 72. But for a fantasy finish, he was wide receiver 31 last week, wide receiver 43 this week. This is post-bye, so whether that's teams getting more film on them, whether that's Adam Thielen maybe just a little bit kind of breaking down at his, age 32, 33 season, and this offense as a whole with Bryce Young having a bad game was not a good week for Adam Thielen. George Pickens, we talked on Thursday Night Football. Deontay is going to get the most looks on the Steelers team. Pickens is going to be boom or bust. Deontay, yeah, he's the guy that is going to get the more short, intermediate routes, and George Pickens can take one to the crib for 70 yards. But when he doesn't, he's going to have a game like last Thursday. Zay Flowers, unfortunately, ends up on this list. And at this point, Zay Flowers is a tease, man. That's all Zay Flowers is. I'm sure next week he's going to go out for 25 now that I'm saying that, but it's just he has 2 games over 10 fantasy points this year, right? You see him on the field, and right now he's a better NFL player than he is fantasy player. You see the explosiveness, you see the twitchiness, but he's just not consistently productive. Last week against Arizona, he had 5 catches, but under 20 yards. And this game, again, game script wise, they go up big early, don't really have to pass the ball much in the second half at all. But you had 1 target the whole game, including that first half where, they were up, but it was like, we're still going to pass the ball. So unfortunate day for Zay Flowers. Moving on, though, we have a few more. Chris Godwin, 6 targets, 2 catches for 16 yards. Mike Evans is the wide receiver 1 on this team. Chris Godwin with Baker Mayfield as his quarterback, I think is probably a low-end wide receiver 2 going forward. We talked about DJ Moore, 3 for 44, but it is possible that Justin Fields is back on Thursday Night Football. That's something we'll have to monitor throughout the week because if Fields is back, we saw how great DJ Moore was. But without DJ Moore, without Justin Fields has not been the same. Christian Watson, feel like he's on this list every week, but 1 big catch for 37 yards. Pair of Seahawks receivers, Lockett and DK, neither of them were good, but the offense was bad. The other name I want to mention that was a dud, but I have high hopes for going forward is going to be Hollywood. 4 for 24, but Kyler's back next week. We're expecting Kyler to be back. Last season, those first 6 weeks when Kyler and Hollywood were both healthy, Hollywood had finishes as wide receiver 26, 38, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 34. So he was someone that was locked in your lineup, and he was someone that was producing some high-level fantasy finishes for you as well. So I'm someone who has had Hollywood on my bench for these last couple of weeks, but now that Kyler's coming back, there's going to be a dip in Kyler's rushing productivity. Just historically, that's what it is. But from a passing standpoint, there really shouldn't be a huge dip. So with Hollywood being the number 1 wide receiver, I think that's someone that could be like a wide receiver 2 going forward.
Yeah, and we saw with Dobbs early on in the season, we had spoken multiple times about it. He had been a sneaky, strong flex play, given that the opportunity that was the Arizona Cardinals offense at that point in time. But with Kyler Murray, you expect Hollywood to get a huge bump. And a name that unfortunately we're going to talk about in the bus and for when we talk about tight end, but Trey McBride, who's been able to show some flashes in his amount of snaps over these last few weeks with the Arizona Cardinals, with Zach Ertz being injured. But moving on to the tight end position for our studs, a lot of great tight end performances this
Very
week.
weird week.
Dalton Schultz goes for 10 catches, 130 and a touchdown, did have a fumble loss earlier in the game. Obviously did not affect the end result. Cole Kmet, I spoke about being the only guy that was really dominant in this game. 6 catches, 8 receptions, 55 yards, 2 touchdowns. I say dominant, got into the end zone twice, and one of them was one of the best catches you're going to see all season. Cade Otton finishes as tight end 3. Tampa Bay tight end goes for 6 catches, 9 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Did have a fumble as well. My tight end start of the week, Jake Ferguson, set 7 catches, 10 targets, 91 yards and a touchdown. This is something to monitor, not just about Jake Ferguson, but tight ends going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. When they go up against a tight end that is of higher echelon on a team with a good pass offense, they've seemed to struggle. And this one was one of those moments. Jonnu Smith, another week, another time we're talking about Jonnu being in the top 5. 5 catches, 6 targets, 100 yards, and a touchdown. A lot of that did come off that big touchdown run. A touchdown play, Taysom Hill, who was going to be in this conversation for quarterbacks also, but I decided to limit it for tight ends. He has a touchdown pass. He has a touchdown reception. He's just one of the funnest guys in football, to be honest with you, man. He's just the definition of a football guy. Mark Andrews being Mark Andrews, you expect that. We spoke about Dalton Kincaid, finishes as a top 10 tight end as well. Luke Musgraves has his first touchdown for his rookie campaign. Hunter Henry gets back into the touchdown column as well. Hawkinson, this is one I want to highlight because we saw with Dobbs that he was heavily relying on him, even regardless of just being first time in the offense. He was the safety blanket, saw 12 targets, brought in 7 of those for 69 yards. Also, Hawkinson had some drops, in my opinion, too. A couple more that he should have brought in, but it was great to see this volume. We didn't speak about Jordan Addison, but another one didn't have a terrible game, but didn't have a great game. But I feel like my strong takeaway from that is Hawkinson's the safer play of the two just off this week alone. Jawan has a touchdown. That was great to see. One of my guys coming into the season. And Njoku gets a touchdown. We saw so many touchdowns in the league. That's why I feel like I'm calling all of them out. Irv Smith gets into the end zone. Sample gets into the end zone. Really a great week for tight ends.
Great week for tight ends. Yeah, Hawkinson, that's a good call because there was obviously some concern with, Kirk Cousins going down the offense as a whole. But if Dobbs is going to give him the amount of targets he gave him, of course you have to play him. So the biggest dud from tight ends is Travis Kelce, 3 catches for 14 yards. Can you guess the last time he had this bad of a game from fantasy production? 2.7 points, I want to say. I have it here. When do you think the last time Kelce had less than 3 fantasy points was?
Was it against the Broncos?
I don't believe so. I don't have the opponent. I'll look it up real quick.
Oh, but you're talking year.
I'm saying I have a week and year.
Oh, goodness. All right. Let's just get egregious. I'm going to go 2019 week 6.
No. I have the opponent now too, though, if you want to guess the opponent.
All right. The opponent was not the Broncos, you're saying?
No, it's a pretty random one, I'll be honest.
Okay. Panthers.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
It was the Giants in week 8 of 2021. So it's been 2 years since we've seen Travis Kelce have this bad of a performance. The Dolphins, I mean, they did a great job. You saw some of the highlights on the broadcast, doubling him, bumping him off the line, just making life really difficult for him. Of course, Travis Kelce. So going forward, he is the tight end 1, absolute must start. Sit him, yeah. The other 2, you mentioned Trey McBride, 3 for 22. Clayton Tune was quarterback, going up against a really tough opponent. And Michael Mayer is the other one who had showed life in week 6, right? Had that 75 yards. We're like, okay, Michael Mayer might be able to do something. These next 3 weeks, 13, 19, and 11 yards. So not really holding out hope in redraft and deep dynasty leagues. Of course, you probably hold them on your bench, but for redraft, he's probably droppable.
All right, I'm with you. Now, the last segment of the show, we're going to get into waiver wire additions. Maybe we drop a quick video later in the week also. When I say later in the week, probably around that Monday night, just because I know it's Sunday, it's a little bit early. There's still time to make plays, but of course we got to do what we got to do. But before we get into that, if you guys have enjoyed what you're watching so far and you guys have stuck around long enough, go ahead and drop a like on this video right down below. If you guys aren't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to the Pick a Side channel. Go ahead and turn that notification bell on so you guys know when we do go live, like moments like tonight, and when Pick a Side's dropping a podcast, when Riv Academy's dropping his episodes, Joel Moran's dropping their content. We started to go live Sunday nights and Thursday nights. But again, if you guys haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate the love that you guys have been showing us recently. Now, to get into the waiver wire additions, let's go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Now, quarterback, really, the landscape's been super thin. But I say this with the idea of I like to think of waiver wire quarterbacks in the mindset of two quarterbacks. When it comes to one, we can talk about streamable plays, but that'll be more so on Thursday's episode. But for two quarterback leagues, are you even thinking about an Aiden O'Connell? Are you even thinking about a Mac Jones?
I don't know their matchups next week off the top of my head,
Uh-huh.
but still probably not. Um, yeah, because Mac Jones had Washington this week, and Mac
And
Jones
he
was
did
not great.
nothing.
Aiden O'Connell had the Giants, whose defense had been, of course, better these last few weeks. But again, what do you have? 8 fantasy points. He's probably not playable. Clayton Tune's job is basically over at this point, so he's not someone you're really looking at. Brett Ripien's going on bye next week. So, yeah, probably really don't want to play any of these guys. If you're in a two
I'm with you.
quarterback league, hopefully you have another option.
All right, Kean Mitchell, you mentioned it earlier in the show. This is probably going to be one of the biggest waiver wire additions of the week. I'm with you with the idea of you being in a Baltimore Ravens backfield. Automatically, that gives you value to me. We already mentioned it, 9 carries, 138 rushing yards. I definitely would throw money at him. I don't know if I'm breaking the bank for him just because I'm uncertain of his role in this offense. I would probably throw around that maybe a 5-10% just for the uncertainty. Am I off base, or are you
I
with
think
me?
that's good because you have Gus there. Justice Hill still saw more work than him. Of course, as you mentioned before, Lamar Jackson is going to be getting plenty of rushing attempts there too. So he's someone that we want to see more play more. He has the explosiveness. He's a good change of pace back, as we mentioned when we were talking about Gus earlier. But it's hard to predict what the Ravens can do with this running back room. If I had to guess, it's still going to be Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and then Keaton Mitchell. So it does feel a bit fake. It does feel a bit like you might be just wasting some money on a guy who had a huge blow up week in garbage time. But again, if you have some money to spend, I'm okay dropping $5 or $6 on him. Wait a week. Does he do it again? Okay, I might have something, but not someone I'm looking to pick up this week and start right away.
Noah Brown, does he pique your interest at all?
Not much. Had that big 75-yard touchdown, but outside of that, he hasn't really been that fantasy relevant this year.
Darnell Mooney only rostered in 19.4% of leagues. Are we intrigued at all?
Unfortunately, not. But he was someone I was thinking about today, thinking I want to remember him for next season. Because if the
Okay.
Bears get Caleb, they get Drake May. We've seen Mooney put up 1,000-yard season. Like we know Darnell Mooney is a really good player. This offense right now just feels so broken. So still for this year, we saw when Justin Fields was in the lineup, he was not looking his way. So regardless of if Fields comes back or if it's Tyson again for another week, Darnell Mooney had a good week, but not something I'm expecting going forward.
Last receiver I'll mention, Khalil Shakir. Are you intrigued at all?
Back-to-back games where he's been relevant. He's still probably, I know Gabe had a goose egg today, but he's still probably the fourth option, right? You have
I'm with
Kincaid's
you.
kind of taken over number 2, of course, Stephon Diggs. Shakir's getting looks now. Or excuse me, Gabe and then Shakir number 4. So in a deep league, where maybe you have an extra bench spot or maybe you're in like a 12 or 14 team league. First of all, he's probably rostered, honestly, in 14 team leagues, if we're being honest. But if he's not in those 12 team leagues, I don't hate putting $1 or $2 just for someone who could be a flex play later on in the season.
Last name I'll mention, Trey Palmer, not for redraft, but for dynasty purposes. If you have a dynasty team and you are watching our show, pick up Trey Palmer. He's an explosive guy. He's being used in this Buccaneers offense with a Mike Evans and a Chris Godwin. You have to be good to be drawing looks in this offense. He's a speedy dude. He can take the top off. He has some great hands. I really like Trey Palmer. Go ahead and do yourself a favor in Dynasty Leagues. If he's available, go ahead and scoop him up. For tight ends, Kate Otten, is he drawing any interest with you? Rostered in 9.1% of leagues.
Cade Otton had a touchdown today. Not really.
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no.
Okay, okay. I was like, can I talk myself into it? But no, probably not.
Luke Musgrave finally gets into the end zone. There was a little bit of hype behind him. Are you interested at all?
No, he's another person that like I'm not out on like dynasty leagues where like I think he has the athleticism. He has decent draft capital, second round pick, I want to say. So someone that the future is probably better than this present day. But right now, this Packers offense is still so ugly that I can't trust him.
I mentioned it last week. Go ahead if you haven't already. Go get Taysom Hill. Last name I'll mention, Juwan Johnson. This was my guy before the season started. I thought he'd have a little bit more of a role in this offense just because of how solid he was last year. Has been banged up this season, was back, did score a touchdown this week. Are we interested in Juwan? To me personally, throw $1. You probably get him for maybe $0, honestly.
Probably.
Just for the idea of you could have a solid tight end option that's going to get some looks and has the opportunity when he's on the field to score at any time.
Yeah, if you like, your tight ends I'm buying, there's no other options. Juwan's kind of a might get a touchdown type of guy. But outside of that, there's not a ton of upside there.
All right, Mr. Dehls, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
We got a super chat, I believe, right?
We do, and it's from my brother Ricky. Ricky, my pick aside brothers, what is up? Broncos beating the Bills. Book it. Guy knows ball. Celtics play Wolves tomorrow. Will be intriguing. Also, Drew, Lakers are baby food. This is coming from a Mavericks fan who just struggled with the Hornets and just got blown out by double digits to the Nuggets. To me, I'm not moved. Lakers, we kind of didn't care against the Magic, and I say we didn't care where it's not true. The Magic just weren't missing, and we weren't hitting shots. It is what it is.
They were playing well.
But we are going to beat the Bills next week. Take that to the crib. I'm with you, Ricky.
Okay.
Stamp it and sign it. It's done. It's happening. Now, again, before we wrap up, first off, we appreciate you guys tuning in. It's always amazing to see the love that you guys show to the Fantasy Reaction Show. We're going to be here every Sunday night, every Thursday night. That's the consistent schedule from here on out. If you made it this far, leave a like on the video. It really helps us a lot, and it lets us know what you guys like to hear us talk about. If you guys are having any issues in your fantasy leagues, if you have any questions about start sits, waiver additions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section down below. And lastly, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, which you guys have been doing an unbelievable amount of love with us, showing us the just a crazy outpouring of love. The amount of subscribers that we've been getting recently has been amazing. You guys have been doing an excellent job. But if you're watching and you haven't subscribed, this is your time. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn that notification bell on. And that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. We'll see you guys next time.